All right, I'll leave that up for just a little bit. Get a couple more of you in there. Here we go with lesson 6 today, National Airspace System. So one of the things I enjoyed on my COVID closure when Western sent us all home back there in 2000 is I enjoyed video introductions. Started making them up from all my lessons. Had to do something with my time there. So it's a fun way to introduce our topic there. As you saw, there's a lot to airspace. We have our controlled airspace, uncontrolled airspace, special use, other airspace types. And it's just in the domestic world, and for the most part we're lined up with ICAO, and so we go worldwide and you'll hit Class B airspace, or you'll be flying in Class Delta airspace, right? Or maybe you'll find that elusive critter called Class Foxtrot airspace. It does exist out there, not in the US, but it does exist. So it's this real interesting world that we fly in, and your point right now in your training, you're heavily invested in knowing the airspace. A, because you fly in it, but B, because you're going to be tested by your pilot examiner, whether it's the instrument check, commercial check, or if you go on to be flight instructor check. They're going to be testing you really hard on your knowledge of airspace, operating in it, when do you need to change rules. So we just need to make sure that you are all set on that. Interestingly enough, from the private pilot perspective, there's nothing different. There's nothing different for airspace for commercial pilots. So a lot of what we are doing here today might seem like review to some of you. And so that was one of the purposes of assignment C2, get you going through airspace review through the AIM, making sure you're on board, able to answer the questions. You probably learned a couple things about airspace during that. That's great. And we want to take our time here to highlight some of the things that are going to be important, some of the things that are on the knowledge exam, but look at it from more of an application, operational standpoint there. If you got some questions you want to type in, we've got the discussion board up for it. We start off with talking about airspace symbols and colors. As we know, airspace is three-dimensional, but the cartographer has had to take 3 dimensions and push them down, smash them into 2 dimensions. The only way that they can accomplish that is using special symbols and colors. Now, you know a lot of these symbols, a lot of these colors. We're going to look at some of the key differences here. All right, I'm not going to teach you like you didn't know anything about airspace today. I'm assuming you already know what certain airspace symbols look like. So let's start with some of the oddballs. You may see these from time to time in your training, and you may have ventured out already and have seen these type of symbols. This first particular one is for Class Charlie airspace areas. We all know that the floor of the airspace is designated at the lower, and the upper limit of the airspace is designated by the symbol on top there. They just happen to be letters. So this is from the surface, and the T is indicating to the top, not include, I'm sorry, to the base of the overlying airspace above you, but not including it. So we're trying to say if your Class Bravo airspace begins at 2,000 feet, this Charlie goes up to, but not including the 2,000 feet. So at 2,000, you're firmly in one airspace type. So this is common in busier Bravo areas. Chicago Midway Airport is an example of having one of these. So if you've ever been over to Midway VFR, they'll tend to keep you down no higher than 1,900 feet in MSL. Might seem pretty low to you, but you know, Chicago area is a little bit lower to sea level than we are. So that's one example here. Another example is going to involve delta airspace. Whenever you have a delta airspace underneath a Charlie or Bravo shelf, they might put a minus sign in front of it to indicate that the airspace goes up to, but not including that level. Okay. So this delta airspace goes up to, but not including 3,000 feet. At 3,000 feet, you are in the next overlying airspace, whether it's a Charlie shelf or a Bravo shelf. If you've had a chance to get over to the north side of Chicago, the Pewaukee area, Chicago Executive Airport, they have this example in there as well. So there's ones you may have had an opportunity to see. If you go to specific parts of the country, you will see some different symbols that are unique to that area, such as New York. And looking at New York, they have a lot of Bravo airspace all over the place. New York City area. And there's lots of water there too. And so the symbol that you'll likely see is the plus sign here for the base of the airspace. And that means it begins above that level. So this would mean that the Bravo airspace begins above 500 feet MSL. Of course, they're doing this here because pilots, they like to abide by that rule for minimum altitude. In general, you know, you're not going to go any lower than 500 feet to the ground or the water. So this gives pilots at least 500 feet to fly without actually being inside the Bravo airspace. So as long as you maintain 500 feet in this area, 500 feet MSL, you're not in the Bravo, you don't need the clearance. Okay, so those are some of the unusual ones with Bravo, Charlie, Delta airspace areas. They also have some unusual ones for Echo airspace areas, but I won't get to that yet until I get a top hat question done. So I'm going to close out this attendance. All right, some of you failed your security check, but I'll get you taken care of. Here we go with top hat question. Looking at classification of airspace at 8,000 feet mean sea level, directly over the Colorado Air and Space Airport. So lower right portion of the core of the picture there is Colorado Air and Space. Or classification of airspace at 8,000 feet directly above that airport. Oh, a little bit of a mixed bag there. Most of you did get that answer correct with Bravo. So I look in the lower right corner here, I do see the dashed blue for my Delta airspace, and I notice just east of the runway complex, minus 8,000. So Delta goes up to, but not including 8,000. Look just to the south here, and we see that the floor begins at 7,000 feet. So interestingly enough, you have an area where Delta and Bravo are overlapping one another, but at 8,000, you are squarely in the Bravo airspace there. All right, now we take a peek at class echo areas. They're not as prevalent as they used to be, but most certainly you will still find examples of these throughout the country. And it is the blue zipper line here. That blue zipper line is just indicating that the floor of echo airspace begins other than 700 or other than 1200 MSL, or AGL rather. Okay. In fact, they do list this area here as beginning at 12,000 feet mean sea level. So based upon, an obstacle down here at just under 6,600 feet, you've got a lot of Gulf airspace. So between, the top of this ridge here, all the way up to but not including 12,000 is Gulf airspace area. Now these are going to be used to provide an IFR en-route ATC service. Okay. My guess is there's probably no coverage for radar below 12,000 feet there. And there's probably no need to make a controlled airspace below 12,000 feet. Otherwise, we're in a blue shaded area. I know we're blue because of this coloration over here. There is blue shading on your chart from time to time. Right? And the nice thing, the cartographer is trying to say, hey, there's a nice hard edge right here. That's kind of the beginning point of it. And your cartographer has then made it feather kind of in this direction here. It means it goes from a darker shading to a lighter shading, and then it just totally disappears because your cartographer is not going to color everything blue for you, right? So they're going to imply that that blue shading just continues on. Let's take a look at that blue shading a little bit more. This is not too current, within the last 5 years, a sectional chart. That generally represents our airspace area over here, and it should be familiar with the magenta shading. And you're thinking, okay, magenta shading, we are looking at controlled airspace beginning at 700 feet above the ground. So we got that, and we know there's, like over here, the Elegant Airport, this nice hard edge. So that's where the magenta shading begins, and it's been feathered to indicate that it goes inward, so that the cartographers say this whole area here is magenta shading. Okay. What about on the outside of that magenta shading? Okay. On the outside of it, the cartographer didn't put the color there, but it's implied to be blue. So all this out here, in fact, let me change my pen color. All this out here in between these magenta areas, this is all technically blue shading out here. Okay. Everything out here between the magentas is all blue shading. Okay. So remember, I told you that when the blue shading area begins, it just keeps running. So it's implied here. So let's take a peek at a much earlier sectional chart. This one comes from about 1980. Same area, same airports, same magenta areas for the most part, but now you can see that blue shading. This is how they used to color the sectionals. Kind of look like a case of measles with the blue shading surrounding the magenta shading. So just letting you know that it's there, even though the cartographer has removed it from current sectional charts, it's still there. And we know that magenta shading, echo at 700 feet, and the blue shading is echo at 1,200 feet above the surface. So I just want to make sure you're aware of that. Because a lot of people, they look for that blue shading and they swear they can't see it. But we got to understand the cartographer is implying that it is there. Take a look at another area in the country, and you'll find this more commonly in mountainous areas where they may not be able to put controlled airspace all the way down to the surface or down to 700 feet, or down to 1,200 feet. So understanding how they take that three-dimensional airspace and smash it down into 2 dimensions, we can understand the use of the colors and symbols from the cartographer. And we'll start in the kind of the southwest corner at the Santa Fe Airport. We see the dashed blue there, and we'll just color that in to help us understand, yes, we have a delta airspace here, and that goes upwards from the surface to 8,800 feet. Now, surrounding that delta airspace is an area of magenta shading. And just coloring that in for you, we can see that there's another airport off to the northwest, Los Alamos. So they have an airport with magenta shading around it. We know magenta shading indicates an instrument approach. All right, so we have instrument approach for the airports. So we're protecting airspace. We're bringing it lower to try to prevent VFR aircraft from scud running while there's potential for instrument approach operations during bad weather. Right. So there we go with our Echo at 700. But Echo is a strange critter because there's different versions of Echo. We go to the right side to Las Vegas, not the big international one in Nevada. We're New Mexico here. Las Vegas Airport. You see it has dashed magenta, so we know that's surface-based. It's a magenta-colored airport. We know it's non-towered airport. So we have controlled airspace down to the surface at this airport here. Again, it's being protected all the way to the surface this time, so that if the weather conditions are IFR, you're going to need a clearance to get in or out of that airport. That was one of the questions in that airspace review. What are the requirements at this type of an airport? And when it's VFR, well, there are no requirements. You got to be a student pilot or higher to get in and out of there. But when it's IFR out, okay, now we need proper pilot certification. We need proper aircraft equipment to operate in the airspace. We need a clearance to get in or out of that airspace area. And again, that has a magenta area around it as well. So they're further protecting the airspace for instrument approach and departure procedures. All around that area, we should be recognizing blue shading. We see examples of blue shading all around here. So if we just take a moment and color that in, this is what the blue shading would look like here. So now we got 1,200 feet AGL for the beginning of controlled airspace. That leaves a few other areas that are not exactly colored in, but we do recognize the blue zippers. We've got some blue zippers up here. So that denotes that this area right here is Echo at 12,000 feet. Okay, so there we go. It doesn't color everything in, which means we have some areas, 4 different distinct areas with no coloration at all in them. Whenever you see that, the cartographer is implying the default class Echo level, okay, which is 14,500 feet. So by default, this is according to the regulations, Echo begins at 14,500 feet mean sea level unless noted lower. So the lack of coloration in this area tells me I have Gulf airspace all the way up to, but not including, 14,500 feet mean sea level. I call that the default class Echo level. And you may have wondered, well, why doesn't the cartographer just color the entire chart in? This is why. Right? This is what an entirely colored in chart would look like. It would hide a lot of details that you need for visual navigation purposes. Okay. On the west side, there is a restricted area. So sometimes we have a overlap of different airspace types. All right, so that's a lot of different airspace areas put together. Let's try some top hat questions here. You're going to be looking at a sectional chart, and the question is, where does Class Echo airspace begin above the airport? Where does Echo begin above the airport? Think about the blue shading, think about where it begins, think about the feathering of it. Echo begin above the airport. 1,200 feet AGL, we are in a blue shaded area on that. So the west side and the north side of the blue line is the hard part of the line, and it feathers towards the landing airport. $11,700. Okay, that 11.7 in the upper right corner is the maximum elevation figure. Okay, so that's a totally different critter as well. It's not an airspace as well. It's just there for obstacle clearance purposes. What was the other answer? 14.5. Okay. Yep. Now, if you were north of the blue line or west of it, that small strip, then your airspace would be at 14,500 feet mean sea level. Try another question here. You're looking at the sectional chart. Where does Echo begin above the airport? And think about the hard blue edge. Think about where the feathering occurs. The darker side is the hard edge side. All right, yeah, most of you got that one correct. 14.5 is correct there. Looks like someone picked the maximum elevation figure again, so that would be incorrect there. All right, the 700 AGL, okay, there is no magenta shading in here for 700. That's why 700 is not correct. It is lying in the area, the hard edge. It's inside of that hard edge, so there is no shading over it. One more question here. Look at the sectional chart. Where does Echo begin above the airport? All right, and we've got most of you on the right answer there. So some of you did say 700, and some said 1200. Okay. So 1200 is not correct because 1200 is going to be on the outside of the magenta area. And are we inside magenta shading? Well, it's overlapped by the magenta glass echo surface area. If you go outside the dashed magenta line, then we're in the 700-foot shaded area. All right, let's take a look at some other interesting things about airspace, things you ought to be able to easily recognize. I know a lot of you just love ForeFlight. And I'll be meeting with some of you and asking you a question, and boom, you're going to be tap, 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 tapping on ForeFlight. And I'm thinking, it's all on the chart. You don't have to tap anywhere. Look at the chart, okay? One of my favorite questions for the private pilot is, what's the easiest way to determine if there's a tower there? The blue color means there's a control tower. You don't have to look up anything in the chart supplement or anything. You just look. It's a blue airport. Wow, got a control tower. Okay, magenta airport, non-towered field. All right. It's also interesting to note what makes a delta airspace. A control tower is one component for delta airspace, but the other component is official weather reporting services. So it's interesting here. We look at the blue airports here on the left. Columbus Airport is designated as a delta airspace. It has approved weather reporting there. All right. There's another airport. It's an Army airfield. There's no blue dash lines around it. So interestingly enough, that is a delta, it is a Gulf airport with a control tower. For some of you, that might just be a mind-blowing. Whoa, wait a minute, whoa. Control tower and uncontrolled airspace. Yes, yeah, there are provisions in the regs for it as well. You treat it as if it was a delta airspace. So within 4 miles and within 2,500 feet, you have to contact that tower if you're going to land there. So just keep that in mind. A control tower by itself does not mean it's a delta airport. So let's try a top hat question here. We're looking at the Young Army Airfield. Must be a true or false question here. Is it a tower controlled airport? Make sure you identify Young Army Airfield. Yeah, it's true or false. All right, taking a peek. And most of you got that correct answer. False, right? So Young, Army Airfield, that's military base, the 2 circles on the right side here, they're magenta colored. 2 circles, military base, magenta, non-towered. Well, isn't that interesting? It lies within a delta airspace area. That's right. But the airport itself is not tower control, so we don't call Sparta Tower for takeoff clearance. We take off and then we tell Sparta Tower we've departed. Or before we land there, we call up Sparta and let them know we're entering your airspace, landing at Young. That's how that works. Okay? You're not controlled by the tower for your operations there. Try another one here. The Acadiana, oh, that's a tough one there. Acadiana Seaplane Base is a tower-controlled airport. True or false? All right, so hopefully you picked up on this one. Well, most of you got it correct. The seaplane base symbol there, all right, and that is denoting in the blue color that is towered control. Okay? This happens to be a canal paralleling the main runway. It's a very interesting critter right there. So if you want to look that up later on ForeFlight, you can pull up this airport. It's just a canal, pretty wide canal. Okay. Palacios Airport is a tower control airport. True or false? All right, I hope you got it all. You did. Nice job. No tower there. But it is controlled-based airspace. So if it's a VFR day, we don't have any additional rules to operate there. If it's IFR, we got radio communication requirements. We've got clearance requirements from ATC, aircraft requirements, pilot certification requirements. So let's see if we got questions going on. All right. Are you supposed to follow weather minimums and entry requirements for Bravo or Delta for the 1,000 foot between 7 and 8? And we're talking about that Colorado airport from that question there. So a good question there. And whenever you have an overlap of airspace types, use the most restrictive rules. So we would use the Bravo rules in that 1,000 foot area. So the weather minimums for Bravo, clearance requirements as well. Anybody got any other questions? All right, well, let's keep going here. Talk about some regulations in airspace. Talk about some weather minimums. Of course, I did promise you a quiz at some point today over some weather minimums, specifically Class G. So we'll be getting to that much later today. We got an area for you to type in some questions if you want. Some little known areas of the regulations are in the appendices, specifically Appendix D. We'll start off with Section 1 there. If you want to look for the appendix to Part 91, you'd go past all the 91 regulations, and that's where you're going to find the appendices. And Section 1 talks about the requirement for transponders. And in general, you pretty much know Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, airspace areas inside them. You should remember within 30 miles of the Class Bravo primary airport. I had a note here, it's not within 30 miles of Bravo, it's within 30 miles of the Bravo primary airport. Update my notes here next time. So the Mode C and ADS-B veil is based upon 30 miles from the primary airport, so that's where you need it. If you go above Bravo, if you go above Charlie, you're going to need your Mode C transponder. Interestingly enough, if you go below Charlie shelf, transponder is not required. Not so at the Bravo airport, right? Because you're within 30 miles of the primary Bravo airport, you need it anyway. Now, you may not be as familiar with the 10,000 foot rule. 10,000 foot mean sea level, you need a transponder, Mode C, unless you're within 2,500 feet of the ground. There is an exception to the rule. Okay? Often the FAA will have the rule, and then they'll give an exception to the rule. Here's the case. If your aircraft was not equipped with an electrical system, you can't have a transponder then. So you're exempt from certain parts of the requirement. So you can fly within the Mode C veil. You can fly above Charlie airports, but you cannot fly within Alpha, Bravo, or Charlie airspace. All right, another part of Appendix D, sections 3 and 4. Section 3 talks about special VFR operations and where they're prohibited. There are a list of airports in this section that prohibit special VFR operations. They have then put the NOSVFR label above the airport name on the sectional chart. So if your examiner tries to sneak in an oddball visibility and asks, can you get a special VFR there? Take a look at the airport name box. Verify that it's a possibility there. All right, solo pilot operations, that's section 4. Solo student pilot operations are prohibited at certain airports. So we got a list of about 12 airports that will not allow a student pilot to operate in the airspace, even with training, even with an endorsement. So Chicago will be an example that prohibits solo student pilots from operating. Interestingly enough, Detroit Metro does allow it. All right, some other interesting things about our regulations is the variety of numbers they give us for visibility and cloud clearance requirements. So I want to try and help demystify all those numbers. We learn different ways. I'm going to offer you this tool for helping to remember these. I know for me, personally, it worked beautifully. This was originally developed by Rod Machado, so I'll give him credit for it. And I read his article on it many, many years ago. I made a photocopy of the article, put it away in my file cabinet somewhere. I thought when I get to teaching that part of ground school, I'm going to share this article with everybody. And once you know it, I couldn't find that article when it came time to teach it. So I decided I'm just going to sit down. I'm going to draw out my triangles. I'm going to see if I can remember it. And it's been like 6 months, right? And I was able to pretty much get about 90% of the airspace triangles put back together. I finally found that article and compared it. I made a couple modifications to it. So I'll share those with you. Again, I offer it as a tool to help you bring some common sense way of thinking about airspace, visibility requirements, cloud clearance requirements. And let's start with this, just defining different levels on the triangle. Our base here is going to be at the surface. We got that, and then we have a midpoint for 10,000 feet because we have rule change for IFR, VFR, and up to but not including the 18,000 feet up here. And we're starting in our upper triangle here. So we're above 10,000 feet, below 18,000 MSL. And at this point here, this is where your higher performance aircraft are going to be flying. That means they're flying faster and they're going to be flying higher. Okay. And we'll give you the numbers here. You should already be thinking 5 miles for the visibility requirement, and 1,000 feet above, 1,000 feet below, and a mile, statute mile horizontal. Okay, this is effective in echo airspace areas, as well as Gulf, provided you're above 1,200 feet AGL. I like to think of it, fast aircraft, higher performance aircraft. That is the reason for the increased cloud clearance and visibility minimums. Faster aircraft needs more time to make weather-related decisions. So we need to operate just a little bit further from the clouds to make those decisions. But I do think about a military aircraft called the F-111. The F-111 Aardvark. So if you're into aircraft recognition, you're already thinking of a two-pilot swept-wing bomber. Interestingly enough, letter F is the 5th letter of the alphabet. That's your 5 statute miles. Okay, and the 111 helps me to think about the 1,000 feet below, the 1,000 feet above, and the 1 statute mile horizontal. So it's a silly way to think about it, but that's sometimes silly gets you to remember things very nicely. We're going to start in or move down to the blue triangle now. And the blue triangle, you're probably thinking, that looks like an upside down wedding cake, which reminds me of Bravo airspace. And you are thinking correctly that we are in Bravo here. The nice thing about Bravo is everybody's under radar contact with each other. So we have a high degree of control, and ATC does give leeway to our VFR pilots there, who need 3 statute miles of visibility, but they can operate clear of clouds. Pilots need that relief from the regulations in Bravo airspace, as it's a more congested area, but trying to stay 500 feet below a cloud could get them into trouble with another aircraft at a different altitude, so they get some relief from that. Move over to the triangle on the left side. This is going to be a variety of airspace areas. It is going to be your Charlie, Delta, Echo, and Golf at night airspace areas. All these are the same. Charlie, Delta, Echo, Golf at night. They all have the same weather minimums, our standard 3 statute miles visibility, 1,000 feet above, 500 feet below, 2,000 feet horizontal. That shouldn't be anything new for you right there. Okay. But in case you do have trouble remembering that, remember the Cessna aircraft company made a model 152. Now, you know that Cessna 152, it's got a 108 horsepower engine. It does not like to fly high. It flies slow. It's pure joy to fly, by the way. It just so happens that the letter C is the 3rd letter of the alphabet. That's your 3 statute miles visibility. And of course, 152 just equates with 1,000 up, 500 below, and 2,000 horizontal. So effectively, what we're trying to say is if you're above 10,000 feet, you got a 5-mile visibility requirement. If you're below 10,000 feet in controlled airspace, you got a 3-mile visibility requirement. So that's it for controlled airspace, 3 or 5. Think about it, right? You don't have any other choices, 3 or 5 miles. Okay, that's controlled airspace, right? Now let's go to the right corner, right triangle, and look at Class G airspace. Okay? That's what's remaining here. And Class G's got a couple different critters to it. And we're going to start with below 1,200 feet AGL. And if you know John and Martha King, they put on those wonderful training videos. All right, they just seem to be larger than life. They got a nickname for Class G airspace. It's called the Go For It airspace. 1 mile visibility, clear clouds. Go for it. How far is 1 mile visibility? Well, you got a runway 23 right here. It's 2 miles long. So let's take half of it. Let's think about time. How long is 1 mile? In a Cirrus traveling at 120 knots ground speed, that's 30 seconds, right? 2 miles per minute. That is 30 seconds of visibility. So that's Class G. Gives you perspective of why it's the Go For It airspace. You want to fly with 30 seconds of visibility. You see an object ahead of you, you've got 30 seconds to avoid it. Right? That's what it's all about. Now you start going up a little higher, and interestingly enough, the weather changes a little bit. You tend to get more clouds a little bit higher up. So we keep the same visibility requirement of 1 statute mile, but now since there's tend to be more clouds to deal with, we have our standard 500 below, 1,000 above, and 2,000 horizontal. All right, so weather minimums. Yeehaw. Uncontrolled airspace. It's either going to be 1 mile or 5 miles. Unless it's nighttime, then you got 3 miles, of course. So whenever your examiner is asking you questions about Class G airspace, you need to absolutely verify how high above the ground are you and whether it's day or nighttime. But Class G is certainly an interesting critter because the regs allow you to do some interesting things in Class G airspace. Let's take a look at Class G night traffic patterns. It's a kind of obscure reg. You'll probably never be asked it on any sort of oral exam, but just in case the examiner surprises you one day with it, we obviously know at Class G we need 3 statute miles in our standard clearance. But the FAA does say that we can reduce those all the way down to 1 mile and clear clouds if we stay within a half statute mile of the runway. So just understand this, nighttime, traffic pattern, Class G airspace, you can get away with 1 mile visibility, clear clouds, as long as you stay within a half mile of the runway. That might be a little tough in that Cirrus to do, but there are a lot of aircraft that you can do that very easily in. All right, let's try a top hat question. Minimum visibility to land at this airport at night. That's our question here. All right, see what you did. 1, 3, and 5. All right, I think I'm going to surprise somebody on this one. It is 3 statute miles. All right. Oh, but wait a minute, Mr. Nikolai, didn't you say we can land it with 1 mile in Class G? Well, if we're doing traffic pattern, we are. Okay. Our question here, this is where you got to be very careful with the FAA questions. The question's not asking you about traffic pattern takeoffs and landings. It just asks you straight out for landing on that. So make sure you don't read too much into the question there. Let's try another one here. Minimum visibility if the pilot's practicing night takeoffs and landings at this airport. Okay, and answer D is the correct answer there. Now the question was very specific that we were practicing night takeoffs and landings, so now we get relief from that 3 statute mile requirement. Seems I still got a couple of you on that one. All right, let's talk about a few more things, and then we'll take a quick break. Got to make sure we're all on the same page with terminology. That a basic VFR. That's just a term that we use to define the changeover point between rules, between operating on an instrument flight plan, instrument flight rules, or being able to operate under visual flight rules. It does require that the ceilings are 1,000 feet or greater, and the visibility is 3 statute miles or greater. Got to have both of those in there. If either one is meeting or is less than the minimum criteria, then it is IFR out there. If it's IFR, if you're less than basic VFR in the weather, then absolutely must have a clearance to enter controlled airspace. That's why you're getting your instrument rating, right? So that's something you have to understand before entering controlled airspace. When the weather is less than basic VFR, you have to have a clearance. However, the FAA does give us a possible option for special VFR. So even though I'm below basic VFR, there might be an option for special VFR. And that only applies to controlled surface-based airspace areas. So obviously, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, those have controlled airspace down to the surface, but also think Class Echo airspace, right? I know my graphic doesn't have an Echo in there, but a Class Echo surface area as well. So you could get special VFR at a Class Echo surface area. In the daytime, it does require that ATC clearance, 1 mile, 1 statute mile visibility, and clear clouds to operate in. So any private pilot can operate special VFR. Private pilot or higher, rather. If we go at nighttime, we're going to keep those same day requirements, but we are going to add that the pilot has to be instrument rated and current and the airplane is instrument equipped. You got to have a fighting chance. If you're a special VFR at night, it's very easy to go into the cloud. You got to have a fighting chance to survive. So that's the FAA's philosophy on that. All right, a couple more slides here. Extensions to airspace areas. From time to time, the airspace area will get an extension. The Delta could have things added onto it, such as our Owensboro Airport. It's got an extension to the north. We see dashed magenta surrounding it. And then also to the south and southwest, we see dashed magenta. So those are extensions. Those extensions are the same flight category as the primary airport. So if Owensboro goes IFR, the extensions are also IFR. It doesn't matter if they've got VMC conditions in them. If the primary airport is IFR, the extensions are IFR. On the right side, we have a Class Charlie airport, and they have a very large extension to it. Remember, these extensions are mainly there to protect instrument approach and departure paths. There's also one on the kind of the northwest side there. Again, extensions are considered the same flight category as the primary airport. So questions, let's see if you typed in any. Didn't see any there. And is there any verbal questions? All right. Tell you what, go ahead, take about a 5-minute break. Come on back. We'll talk about the assignment and then get into our group activity today.
Hey.